Hi, I'm darkmindedsith. Well, here we are. This is a video I never thought would see the light of day. And sure enough, we are finally here. My friends, this is it. This is the final episode of Banjo-Tooie. Yeah, finally, jeez. So, the final episode. This video is primarily going to consist of a long discussion about the game. It's going to be just my review and final thoughts on this game. Just talking about all of it. What I like, what I don't like. Anything I can think of about this game, really. While I'm talking about all of that, there's going to be three main showcases. I'm going to be showing off the multiplayer-ish. I'll get to that in a second. And then I'm going to be showing off the game's credits, and then finally the game's cast of character list. So before we get the ball rolling with all of that, there are a couple little things I want to show on the main menu. So let's go ahead and cut to that right quick. Okay, so Banjo-Tooie, unlike the first game, does have some fun little extras. The main ones are the replay mode and the multiplayer. The replay mode allows you to replay all the mini-games, refight all the bosses, and watch any cutscenes. Now, what is interesting I want to say about the bosses is two things. In all the replays for the bosses, you only have 5 HP. That's it. Which isn't so bad for, say, Klungo, but for Weldar and Gruntilda, that can be pretty gosh darn challenging. So, if you're up for a pretty interesting challenge, you might want to try out the boss replay for some of those fights. What's also interesting about the boss refights here is it gives you all the game's eggs, no matter what point that boss is in the game. So say you could fight the first Klungo fight with grenade eggs and ice eggs if you want. But other than that, it's mostly just simple replays of all the things in the game, which is kind of nice. Okay, so next up is the multiplayer-ish. Why ish? Well, yeah, the very lame, pathetic answer is I don't have anybody I can play the multiplayer with. Yeah, oh my god, it's so sad and all. I have friends, I just mostly have internet friends, and my real life acquaintances aren't really fellow gamers who would be interested in this, so I unfortunately just don't really have anybody to play this with, but I do want to show it off to kind of have something, well, to show it off, but also to kind of have something in the background while I'm just talking about Banjo-Tooie. So what I'm going to do is just the very lame way out of this, which is to just have a second controller sit there, just so I can be able to play the multiplayer. I'm going to kind of switch it around a little bit and switch from player 1 to player 2 back and forth and do some goofy little things in the multiplayer with it, but it's mostly just kind of there in the background while I talk about Banjo-Tooie. So if you want, throughout this whole video really, you can just minimize the video and have it in the background if you want. But the multiplayer is going to be there for the sake of showing it off and just to kind of have something as placeholder while I'm talking about the game. So, but before we get into the final review and discussion, there are a couple of specific things in the multiplayer I do want to show off and talk about. Most of the multiplayer are just the mini games that are found in the game. They're just multiplayer versions of them. They're kind of not all that interesting, but some of them are. Some of them have some pretty interesting changes and features. The main ones are the egg shooting games. That is the Target Sand, Shootout, the Ordnance Storage, and Clinker's Cavern. What you can actually do in these is choose different characters. There's just Banjo with, Kazooie as a gun. You can also play as Grunty, Jam Jars, Mumbo, and you can also unlock the Jinjo, which you get by hatching the egg in Heggy's shed. And they all have different features, they all have different speeds and weights. Gruntilda is very heavy, very slow, but she can hold more equipment. And it kind of goes from heavy to light. Jam Jars is a little heavier, Mumbo and Banjo are kind of normal, and the Jinjo is the lightweight. The Jinjo is very fast, but smaller, but can't hold as much. Jinjo is kind of like the equivalent of Oddjob in GoldenEye, if you were ever into the multiplayer in those games. There's a lot of comparisons to GoldenEye's multiplayer with this. As far as I can see, it's the same engine and everything. I would say Grunty is, I don't even know what character it would be. Maybe the equivalent of Jaws, possibly? But the Jinjo's the one I like the most. It's really, really fast. So I'm going to kind of show those characters a little bit, just kind of what they look like and their guns and things like that. So, a couple of other features in these shootouts is there's a couple of other little eggs and things. There's proximity eggs, which are like proximity mines. And there's also this honey pot that you can get, which makes you sort of invisible. It's more like very, very transparent, where the characters can't see you as much. It's kind of like Klungo's little potion. So, I'm going to start the multiplayer showcase by just showing off those games and those characters and such. And then after that, I'm going to transcend into just a full multiplayer showcase, just showing off all the different games. While I'm doing all this showcase, I'm going to have my full Banjo-Tooie discussion, and pretty much the gist of the rest of the video is going to be that. I might interrupt myself a little bit to talk about a couple of things, but the rest of the video is basically going to be a full discussion of Banjo-Tooie. So let's get on with the discussion, the multiplayer showcase, and let's get started. So, Banjo-Tooie, what do I overall think of this game? I love this game. I love it really just about as much as I love the first game. Banjo-Kazooie is probably my second favorite game of all time. I would put Banjo-Tooie right alongside it, really. As far as video game sequels go, what I think is important to, well, any sequel, really, in this case video games, is you want to take things a step forward in the series. You want to improve upon the original, bring new things to the table, but you also want to stay true to the spirit of the original. You don't want to rehash things too much, where it just feels like the first game with a new coat of paint added. But you don't want to drift away too much to where it doesn't even feel like the original anymore. You feel like you're playing a completely different game. And as far as sequels go, with that criteria, I think Banjo-Tooie does this very, very well. I loved this game when I was a kid. Going back and playing it for this project, I'd say I loved it almost just as much. So let's talk about different things in this game. Let's start with the characters. The Banjo-Kazooie series does a great job of just making all the characters likable. I can't think of too many characters really that I just don't like. Even someone like Canary Mary is almost kind of... It's almost like you love to hate her, in a way. She's not... You don't hate her the same way you hate a character like, say, Navi. I like pretty much every character in this game. Every character is likable or funny. You want to help them. You want to see their goal achieved. What I also like in the Banjo-Kazooie series is the characters are enjoyable, but they're able to do this with such little screen time. There's some characters that you get to know over time and do things with over time, like, say, Gobi the camel, but most of the characters are very short-lived. You help them, talk to them a little bit, and then they're gone. But you like all of them. And, yeah, that's what I think this series does very well. And I think that this game does that very well. So let's talk about some of the new main characters. Let's see, we've got Jam Jars. I really like Jam Jars. He's a great counterpart to Bottles. They could have made Jam Jars. They could have made the tutorial guy in this game just basic tutorial man. But they took things a step further. They said, hey, here's Bottles' brother. He's quite different than Bottles. He's rough and tough. He's mean. I like him being a drill sergeant. The idea of, here's a drill sergeant character, like, putting his foot down and commanding you and teaching you how to do things. He's also he's a little more interesting than Bottles in that he's more technical, more mechanical. You know, his warp silos, the egg moves he teaches you. He's more like artillery based and military, and I quite like that. So, could we have maybe had a little more character dialogue with Jam Jars? You know, had Banjo and Kazooie talk to him a little more, sure, but I mean, he's there for tutorial purposes. He's fine. And the rhyming thing is kind of fun. The music. So I like him quite a bit more than Bottles, actually. Let's talk about Mumbo and Humbawamba. I like Mumbo a lot more in this game. He does more. He comes out of his hut. He fights enemies. He has special spells that he has each world. He gets involved in your quest. He's there at the beginning of the game. He wants to help you. He's way more of an interesting character in this game, as opposed to the first game where he's just kind of sleeping in his hut. Kind of like his design a little bit more, too. He's a little more cute and nice looking. I don't know. And I like his spells quite a bit. I think that for me, they were consistently unpredictable. I didn't find myself going, oh, his spell's probably going to be this, and it ended up being that. You know, like levitate and making it to where you can breathe underwater, and the rain dance. He was pretty unpredictable, so I definitely liked Mumbo a lot more in this game. Humbawamba. I like her. We don't really get to know her that much, but it's fine. She's a transformation woman. I mean, I don't really care. As far as her transformations go, I definitely like her transformations a lot more in this game than I like Mumbo's in the first game. They definitely felt like improvements. Her transformations, for me, they're a lot more fun to use. They're a lot more fun to travel with. There's various times where you just feel unstoppable with her transformations, like the money van and the daddy T-Rex. And the snowball is a lot of fun to use, rolling around, the gimmick of you have to be big for certain things, tiny for certain things. So I liked just using her transformations a lot more. And I like how obscure they were. I like how they were pretty unpredictable overall. I mean, you could predict the T-Rex and Pterodactyl land, but I don't think you would predict having both the baby and the daddy, though. So, as opposed to the first game, I like the transformations fine in the first game, but they just feel so inferior now that I've played Tooie. The first game's transformations were just more like cutesy, different things to do than just being Banjo and Kazooie. And didn't feel very helpful in the long run. You know, you couldn't attack with any of them except for the crocodile. And even then, his attack didn't even feel all that precise. You know, you couldn't really attack flying enemies very well. And you know, the transformations in the first game were kind of more like fitting into small areas. And they were pretty basic, and I like them okay. Just they feel so inferior now that I've played this game. So then we have Grunty and her sisters. I really like them. I like Mingella and Blabelda. I love their voices. They're hilarious. I love how different they are from each other. I love how they just seem to get on each other's nerves. I thought that they were great characters to introduce, to show up and help Grunty. The problem, though, and I talked about this a little bit already, is I just wish we saw them more. They just really don't get enough screen time. They're at the beginning of the game. They're there in the B.O.B. cutscene, but after that, we don't really get to hear them talk or anything anymore. They're in the quiz at the end of the game, but they're just contestants. They don't have any dialogue or anything, and then they die, I guess. So, I guess you could argue that, you know, it's nice to kind of have them short and sweet and not overstating their welcome, but I don't know. I like them enough to where I would have liked to see them more. Donkey Kong 64 has this thing in it where every time you go to a new world, it cuts to what K. Rool is up to. It's sort of like, meanwhile, here's K. Rool stuff. And those cutscenes are really, really stupid, and they don't make any sense at all. But I would have liked something kind of like that in this game, maybe. Maybe not every world, but I don't know, maybe cutting back to Grunty and her sisters, maybe every blue moon, and just kind of seeing what they're up to and how they're killing time, and, you know, just like how they're spying on us, little things like that. A little more dialogue with them, I think would have been a lot of fun. And I talked about this a little bit before, but maybe even a fight with the sisters would have been great. So, I really like them. It's just kind of a bummer we don't see them more. And it's a shame they're dead or whatever. I guess they're dead, but that's kind of a bummer. Then there's Klungo. Klungo is great in this game. I love what they did with him. He was just kind of basic henchman in the first game. But they really did a lot more with him. You really feel bad for the guy in this game. You know, you really want to see this guy break away from Grunty and live his own life and get away from that work. I like the fights you do with him. I like his sort of rebellion at the end where he leaves, and you know, it's sad, but I like kind of how he gets slowly more and more beat up as the game goes on. So I really like that. I like what they did with him. If they wanted to maybe subtract Klungo a little bit and replace that time with the Grundy sisters a little bit more, I think I would have liked that. That would have been fine, but that would have given us a chance to see them a little more, but I mean, the Klungo fights are fun, so I like the characters a lot in this game. I would say I probably like them quite more in this game than the first game. There's other characters that were new as well. King Jingaling, Jiggy Wiggy, Bottle's family, Heggy, Honeybee. I like all of them, but there's just really not a lot to say about them, I guess. So yeah, awesome characters in this game.